The paradox is that there's a lot of pressure from external world, from governments, for universities to create impact in societies, create solutions for these problems that we're dealing with. But it's still, the system doesn't really support that.
Hello and welcome to the Pathway to Impact podcast series. My name is Madeline Arkins, Research Project Officer at UIIN and your host for today. In today's episode, we explore how universities can foster an entrepreneurial culture and drive impactful change with Rimante Rusaite, Senior Project Officer at UIIN. From storytelling as a powerful engagement tool to fostering shared responsibility and breaking down institutional barriers, this episode offers practical tips for anyone interested in transforming university culture. Today we'll be talking about how to drive entrepreneurial culture in universities, but also maybe on a more wider scale, how to drive cultural change for external engagement in universities. And I'm very glad that I have the pleasure of speaking with my colleague Rimante Rusaite on this very topic today. Rimante is a Senior Project Officer at UIIN and holds an MSc in Environmental Policy and a BSc in Psychology. She's dedicated to sustainability and innovations, and on top of all her very many accolades, she's also a design thinking coach and a systems thinking enthusiast. Rimante, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Maddie, for a very beautiful introduction. I'm very happy to have this chat with you today. And thanks everyone who tuned in as well.
Yeah, it's going to be a good one. Maybe just to get us started, Rimante, to get the folks acquainted, could you tell us a bit more about yourself, your background, and maybe how you came to work on the topic of cultural change in universities?
Yes, thank you. So like you mentioned, my background is in psychology, environmental policy. I studied a bit of innovation management. So quite like an interdisciplinary, very wide an expert of none, interested in many things person. And I've been working in this European project space for nearly a decade now. But about 2 years ago, I joined UIIN. So it became a bit more specific around higher education, universities, future of education, things like that. Before that, I worked on social innovation, community engagement. I worked for an NGO, so it was a wide variety of topics. And in cultural change project was the first project that was handed over to me at UIIN, and it's already been finalized. It was a small project of just under 2 years. We had 4 partners from Sweden, Italy, and Ireland. I love working on a project, and we are talking about all the things that we created together quite a lot, and hopefully we will build on it and continue. Next to that, UIIN is coordinating a Horizon Europe project called Accelerate Future HEI, where we are supporting 9 universities from across Europe and undergoing an institutional transformation and cultural change, mindset, external engagement. Entrepreneurship is also a very big topic in that project as well.
Okay, so you've got this topic hit on in all manner of projects. Do not give Rimante a project unless it's about accelerating external engagement. Thank you for that introduction. Maybe to give a bit more background on the general topic of our chat. So obviously we're talking about, in a practical sense, what the experience from those projects has been, what the insights are, and how to drive cultural change. But maybe your own personal feeling on the topic. Why do you think cultural change is so fundamentally important for fostering this change in approach to entrepreneurship and engagement?
Culture is like a fascia or like a connective tissue, or in a culinary space, like a broth or something like that, where all the other elements are cooking. So if you have an institution and university, you can have all kinds of support structures and services there, but if you don't have a culture to go along with that, this kind of like a mindset and like support in people's space, it will not be as effective as it could be. So I think it's like an atmosphere, like an air. It's quite, intangible, but also everything encompassing, all encompassing element. And that's why I think it's very important.
I like that analogy, both the yoga and the cooking analogy.
You can find out about my hobbies also from my analogies.
So this toolkit that came out of this cultural change project, it identifies 4 key strategies. Could you walk us through them and maybe the thought process as to why these strategies were highlighted or selected as key to driving this kind of change?
Yes, of course. To backpedal a little bit,
Yeah.
we already started with 4 dimensions or 4 areas where like some gaps were identified. So the 4 strategies that you mentioned are raising awareness, improving communication, creating incentive and reward systems, and navigating the support environment. So there were some gaps identified before the project, and that's why UIIN worked on that project, wrote the proposal, and built a consortium to create something. The gaps were as follows. There's still a lack of awareness about the importance and benefits of entrepreneurship and external engagement. We live in a world of overwhelming amounts of data and information, so there's still like not clear communication in universities about the opportunities, where to find them, how to get engaged and involved. Of course, talking about incentives and rewards is quite complicated because it's a system-bound thing. So it's very often part of national or European legislation, what kind of activities are recognized and what kind of incentives can be provided for academics to involve in certain things. And navigating the support environment, it's a little bit about everything. So even if you have a lot of things available, it's still quite complex. There are a lot of frameworks, a lot of offices, and they're all a bit nuanced. So it's a difficult space to navigate for someone who is already very busy with research and teaching and life in general. So we started with these 4 dimensions identified, and the strategies were built on providing solutions for closing those gaps a little bit. And we have 40 tools, and each of those are not isolated. So if you have one tool that is enhancing communication, it will also help with raising awareness. If you have some kind of tool for like creating some incentives, it will also maybe raise awareness alongside. So it's a conversation starter to have these 4 dimensions, but it's not that you have to start somewhere and there's no strict pathways. It's quite open.
Yeah, and that was something I really enjoyed when I read the toolkit myself, that I feel like everything is really contextualized in terms of how you can use this tool in your own institution, what other considerations you might want to keep in mind. And I just spotted a question from Arthur in the chat. Is the toolkit available online? Yes, it is. Rimante, do you have any more info as to the website?
Yes, the short name of the project was timeforunitchange.eu. And we have a report there, a collection of case studies, and the toolkit available. And there are also like other resources, recorded resources and infographics, a lot of nice stuff.
A lot of nice stuff, indeed, can confirm. Maybe moving on to the challenges, and this could also not solely from this one particular project. You obviously have a lot of experience, also like personal experience in leading these universities through this kind of change. What seem to be the biggest challenges they're facing when it comes to external engagement? Is there something that kind of keeps coming up? And yes, my next question would be then, how do you tackle that? But let's do part one.
Yeah, maybe we don't have to linger too long on that, but what we heard a lot from academics and from other stakeholders that we talked to, and I guess we can all relate to that, is a lack of time. So that probably came up the most. And why is that? It's important to look into, like, why is it the lack of time? Is because of what is part of academic career as a pathway. You have to do a lot of research, to publish a lot of papers, you have to do some teaching, and these are all the things that are counting as your career progression. Something like external engagement or entrepreneurship is not so much. And the paradox is that there's a lot of pressure from external world, from governments, for universities to create impact in societies, create solutions for these problems that we're dealing with. But it's still, the system doesn't really support that requirement. So that is one of the biggest challenges. And it's a difficult thing to tackle or find solutions to. Another thing we heard a lot from academics, what are the barriers for them is, for example, bureaucracy. That next to spending some time, it's like very often driven by intrinsic motivation. And even people who are willing to put this extra effort, they are also having on top to deal with a lot of bureaucracy. So this is maybe something on an institutional level that they could be supported in that, like to simplify the procedures or to find solutions around that.
I like what you said about a paradox because it's so true. It seems like it's getting more and more attention, say, on the European policy perspective, and definitely more calls for it, but it seems like it's chasing its own tail, and that the actual action on an institutional level or the systems has not quite caught up with those.
Yeah, some universities are experimenting, like TU Delft, they have included impact. I think that they also put it in the like framework of how they evaluate, or like you can have a career based on something like that. There is something happening, but it's very slow. It's like I say, it's very much like system bound barrier.
There are murmurings, at least. Maybe going back to the dimension of raising awareness, communication, as you said, it's crucial to tell people of the goings on. In your experience, how can universities maybe craft a compelling narrative around their external engagement that can really resonate with both those outside of their institutions, but also maybe incentivize and encourage those inside? And what role does storytelling play in all of that?
Very big role. So that also came up a lot, both talking about issues, how people find solutions, how we were like building the tools. And even like a few weeks back, I had a roundtable with some of the UIIN members, and storytelling also came up. So stories are very important for people since the beginning of humanity, something they can relate to. And again, it's like a good example how storytelling addresses like both raising awareness, provide information, it can create a platform, it can incentivize people, and by doing all of those things can help find right resources and support structures in an institution. So I think it's important to think about who are you talking to, who is your audience. So I don't know if you can have something that would work both internally and externally and for everyone. So I think you have to apply similar like rules to like, I don't know, marketing or like storytelling, that you have to know your audience. And it could be like, we came across many different examples, like you can have a magazine, you can have a comedy night, you can have a giant dedicated coffee break for people to share on what they're working on, ask for support or provide information of opportunities. You can encourage positive gossip. I love that. I heard from someone in Lund University in Sweden that there was a corridor with like positive gossip. Someone was like working on a project, someone joined, and then it creates a ripple effect just by word of mouth. But yeah, so again, coming back, you have to think of who are you gonna tell those stories. And I think also from my personal experience with storytelling in other projects is it's always better if story is told by someone who lived that experience. It's not like a story told for someone by someone, but you can either have students tell a story of how a course with external stakeholders helped them with something, or you can let young academics tell their story of how it's like springboarded their career by getting involved in some kind of European project or like a startup or something like that. But yeah, it's, I think, one of the most accessible and very important pathways towards like change to use storytelling.
And I feel like its importance has grown also with the advent of new AI tools that make some kind of storytelling more possible. But it also feels like a lot of the results that come from that kind of generic, as you say, feeding into all audiences really just flattens entirely the story that you're telling and really doesn't have that same impact.
Yeah, definitely. And it's, yeah, we'll see, because it's happening so quickly. I'm very curious how we can use it to our advantage.
Now, another question I had for you was on the topic of shared responsibility. How can universities foster a sense of collective ownership when it comes to external engagement, understanding that sometimes, or even often, we find that it falls on one person, one champion who can do all this? What are some strategies that can share this responsibility across different departments or people?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think also very important. Shared responsibility or ownership or of something, of creating change, involving people from the very beginning. And one thing I wanted to show, like from the toolkit, is we have this model, which is like a house with 4 strategies and like a roof, but The foundation is the institutional strategy and mission of university. Entrepreneurship and external engagement should be embedded in the institution strategy, and that helps a lot of things. That helps align everything else that you might do around cultural change. Because if you don't have that, then you can have a lot of scattered things happening, but maybe they're not in synergy and supporting. And it can be, one department doing something, another department doing something else. But yeah, they could be doing much more if everything was on that foundation. When we were talking with experts of institutional change, organizational psychologists, like they talked about this kind of feedback loop system that is very important. So of course, decisions are made most often in universities on the top level, and they can definitely instigate some kind of process, innovation, or like project initiative, but it's important to involve people who will be affected by those things. So ask them what they need and what they would like to do, and it should be like an ongoing process, and that creates ownership and shared responsibility, so that empowers people. And you can identify from the top level, you can identify some people who are already doing something, like ambassadors, because there's always people who are doing those things, and then give them a mandate to support them, asking what kind of support they need, and then supporting them. And hopefully it would gather more and more people around it. So aligning with the institutional strategy, if you don't have that, you could start with that. Maybe co-creating or talking about how to embed it, those elements into your institution strategy. And that is a very good tool as well, like to communicate it both internally and externally, attracting the right people to your institution when you're hiring, attracting the right investors or stakeholders to collaborate with.
It sounds like it's a snowball effect, almost, where you gather people and then gain momentum. And that also probably feeds into the longevity of these efforts over time.
Absolutely, because this is another thing. Maybe you have a team who is very passionate about entrepreneurship, but then you have a different leadership coming in. And if you don't have the strategy, it's very easy to drop everything that happened. If you have a strategy that is strong and accepted, co-created, maybe within your institution, that can be continued. So definitely long-term sustainability.
And in the same way, people are not staying in the same teams. People are making entirely different moves or lateral moves into different departments. So I can totally understand the reason, among others, for co-creation. I guess co-creation is important. That was sarcastic for the people listening. In terms of success stories and some examples that have really stood out to you in this work, you've mentioned some already, but I wondered if there were any other in the kind of case studies that you've come across that have really stood out to you. So I mentioned already a joint coffee break, which was actually a case study that was brought in by one of our partners from Jönköping University. In Sweden, they call it fika, like a coffee time with something sweet. And they have, I think weekly it was, but we have a case study collection where you can look it up. And then we also wrote up a tool with some considerations and steps. So it's a great one. It's very, I think, simple to implement. You don't need a lot of resources. You just need to create that platform, find space. And it could be done online. So some examples came from pandemic way back, but it was also quite effective when people still were eager to go online and like lonely enough to participate. But if it might work if an institution works, I don't know, across different geographical areas, time zones or something like that, where it's more difficult with physical events. But of course, it's much better when it's on site with real people. I love that one. Then I love the one from Wageningen University. It's called Ving Dialogues. And it started with creating a dialogue between community and academics to untangle some complicated topics or controversial research, I don't know, around climate change or like genetically modified foods or something like that. So where people are concerned, and then researchers could uncover some myths or just like also find out how people feel about things that they are researching on or teaching about. And it developed into a much bigger thing. So from these like community events, it became a program with 3 pillars, which one of them is to organize those events. But then, of course, to do that, you need to know how to do dialogue. So they also started doing some
kind of training for academics how to engage in a constructive dialogue. It's like a method, and it can even be a research method, which was also picked up in Wageningen. And then third, they created like a mentor pool who can support people in organizing dialogue events. And now they are so successful that they also work with other universities in the Netherlands, and I think they don't even have enough time to answer all the requests. Yeah, that's a great one. And of course, they have resources and institutional support to run that program.
Cool. Wow. I've not heard of that one before, but dialogue itself, particularly dialogue about what can sometimes be very complex, dense academic research, I think is an art in itself alongside the research that they're doing. We have a few more minutes left. I see a question in the chat, although I don't know if there will be enough time to answer this within the next few minutes. It's asking, it's from Arthur, about comparing the situation in North America, where there is an increasing interest in the role of universities in entrepreneurial ecosystems, and whether that is also happening in Europe.
Yeah, it's happening, but I think in the North America, they are a bit more advanced with the recognition and like academic career paths. I have not talked to too many people, but vaguely I can say it resonates also in Europe, but we are a little bit more like stuck into traditional ways for now.
For now. Subject to change.
Yeah.
Thanks, Rimante. Another question I had for you was, maybe the title of this chat is like how to drive entrepreneurial culture. From your experience, what does it take to create a university-wide entrepreneurial mindset? We always talk about entrepreneurship is not just venture creation, it is that feeling and risk taking. Yeah, that's my question for you. What would it take?
It's a million euro or dollar question. But I guess, yeah, time, patience, dedication. But of course, what I mentioned already, the strategy that supports that, I think that would be a first step to really embed it in strategy. And like I say, it would help with both attracting right people, both to work for you and collaborate with you, and then also help guide you through that process. Then flexibility, so I guess with its system change. So you need to find those leverage points, and you cannot create a plan and follow it. So I think you have to have a big vision, a strategy, and then think about what is the next step I can take. Yeah, like what we already talked about, the co-creation, ownership, like giving people mandate, involving people from the very beginning. So you don't go somewhere and invest a lot of time and resources into something that no one wants.
It sounds, I wish, sadly, this is also going to be an audio medium, but you people who are listening on the podcast later will miss how dynamic and adaptable you were in describing what universities need to be. Yeah, it sounds like it's a series of first steps that are also a series of contradictions, but I think this is also what systems change is like in a sector that is often critiqued so much for its penchant for convention and conservatism. It makes sense.
Yeah, definitely.
I believe, we have one more question from Marcella, which we may or may not have time for. Rimante, I'll leave it to you. Marcella asks, I would like to ask about the best practices of the institutional support for boosting the entrepreneurship culture at universities, including overcoming resistances. Do you have some examples of best practices to share?
Institutional support for boosting. So I guess all of the things that we talked about could fall into that category, but I guess maybe it's best to start with something that you can actually have, that you can do. So not trying to change like system or like national legislation, but see of what you can do at your institution and what you can actually implement. So I would say, especially if you want to address changing attitude and mindset, is really giving people platform, providing people platform, empowering those people who are doing, like letting them tell their stories, ideally, not telling their stories. And that hopefully would convince one person and then another. And that's, I think, something that anyone can start with, anywhere they are, whether it's like just a department or you can just start doing something. If you're an academic, you can start doing something and it might be seen.
And it might be.
Yeah.
Words. Thanks, Rimante. And for those curious, again, And if you want to see more on that strategy toolkit, you can find it at timeforunichange.eu. Thank you all for joining us. Rimante, thank you so much for your time and insights. It's always great to chat to you outside the confines of the office. Though people can't tell right now, neither of us are in our UIIN office. Where can people find you if people want to get in touch with you about external engagement, cultural change?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, if any of you would like to work on a follow-up project, please, just reach out on rusaite@uin.org or a LinkedIn profile or just our office email, and then someone will direct your message to me. So if you have some questions that I haven't answered or would like to work on this topic together somehow, just let me know.
Great. You heard it here first, everyone. Thanks, Rimante, and thank you all for joining, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Bye,
everyone.
Thank you for listening to the discussion. Follow UIIN on LinkedIn, and if you're enjoying our podcasts, make sure to subscribe, rate, and review on your podcast platform of choice to help others find this content too.